What's up, cycling junkies? We're back. It's Pack Chatter. Had a couple weeks off, but we're back at it with a stellar guest. Before we get there, we're going to talk about the sponsors. First, we're sponsored by Legacy Bikes. That's Legacy with an I, Legaci bikes.com. Legacy Bikes has all your balance bike needs. So if you got a little one under 6 years old, you want to get them loving the bike, get them a bike from Legacy Bikes. They'll get them started on the balance bike. They'll learn to maneuver the bike without pedaling, and then they'll go right to a pedal bike. No training wheels needed. It's the way to go. Hit them up at legacybikes.com. We're also sponsored by NISBRA, the New York State Bicycle Racing Association. NISBRA does all the behind-the-scenes work for bike racing in New York, whether it's grants, upgrades, officials, calendars, all that good stuff. So they got a ton of good resources on their website, and you can follow them on Facebook. So nisbra.com. All right. Today's guest is Zach Schuster from Cyclocross Magazine. This guy's super interesting. I could talk to him for hours. He knows everything about cyclocross, all the riders, all the races, just the detail and the obsession that you can hear in his voice is amazing. He's super high energy, great writer, really insightful dude, and does just such a good job of covering particularly the domestic scene where you don't get that kind of coverage anywhere at all. And he builds the storylines. He's passionate about the people, and he does it sort of single-handedly. It's a two-man operation there at Cyclocross Magazine, and they're constantly putting out phenomenal content. And they've moved into gravel racing, and they're doing a great job covering that stuff. So it was really cool to be able to just talk to him about what he's seeing both in gravel and cross, and sort of pick his brain as a journalist and what he gets, what he's doing there, and how he's gotten to where he is. So really enjoyed the conversation. A really, really, really good dude. Follow him on Cross Magazine if you're not already checking that out. And I hope you enjoy listening to this as much as I enjoyed doing it. All right, here he is, Zach Schuster.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You'll never go out on a training ride and dig that deep.
Awesome. We won gold.
They're life rides.
I'm like, dude, I'm still figuring this out.
Lose sight of the fact that it's whoever goes faster.
This isn't a road race. This isn't a mountain bike race.
The sensei of sprint, Todd Shesky.
My eyes are coming out of my head. Just get in here.
So we're on with Zach Schuster from Cyclocross Magazine. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing very well. Survived the heat and humidity at Jinglecross on Sunday. So I'm here. I'm alive. I almost passed out from dehydration. So I have no idea how people actually raced on Sunday because it was bad. It was really bad.
How hot was it?
It was mid 80s, but the humidity felt like it was 120%. It was that kind of humidity where you can literally feel it in the air.
Yeah.
Where you're struggling to breathe. And I was just I'm just kind of jogging back and forth between spots. And I can't believe these people are racing for, an hour.
Yeah, that's early season cross heat, huh?
Yeah, it is, sadly.
See, and this is one of the things that, and when, people will, at this point in the year, will say they'll kind of complain, as racers, complain about it being hot for cross. And this is where I always come back to, and this is not because I don't like cross or something, so we're going to disband this theory. But I always say to people, it's because it's supposed to be a fall winter sport, and it's still summer. It's just, it's going to be hot if you're racing cross early September. It's in the Northeast. It's just what it is, and so people are going to have to either adapt. But then people don't want to come out in the end of December, right? Because it's really super cold. So
I live in Wisconsin, so yes, I can verify that people want to race in September, October, early November, and then come mid-November, it's just all right, this really sucks. So right. I think that's a big part of why we do it that way, especially here in the northern parts of the U.S.
Right. Yeah, and it's from a promotion standpoint. It certainly makes it easier to put on a race when you can put stakes in and do things and not have to worry about snow or getting a snowblower and snow blowing the course and and people not coming out because it's full of snow. But the flip side of that is starting at the end of August or first week of September is it's still summer and you're going to deal with that heat, and especially down in PA, right? So or you get anywhere south of New York, and it's like, yeah, it's gonna hang on for a while. So, yeah, I think even the Grand Island race that was here was fairly warm on Sunday.
Yeah, the
Uh,
local race.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Well, there were a couple that were going that were pretty hot, but yeah, it's definitely warm early. But I'll take that any day, man. I'll take the heat all day long. Forget that cold crap. I don't know why anybody wants to run around in the mud and the cold. That's something else, man.
That's
Yeah.
cross.
So yeah, but say the guys who put on gravel races who, in March, I've seen some of the pictures from your race.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm in the truck.
So I guess gravel cross, it's all the same. And maybe
is.
that's why there's such a crossover between the two is gravel has some of those like quote unquote cyclocross conditions, even though the official position is that cyclocross weather is the weather that you're racing cyclocross in. So
Yeah, for sure.
we'll just leave it at that.
We definitely get a good share between those. Most of our guys that do come out are the cross guys because the roadies don't want to come out in the bad weather.
There you go.
Absolutely.
True.
Nobody
So
wants
you've had
to-
a couple busy weekends here with a couple big events. What's the beginning of the season looking like for you?
Well, the beginning of season has looked like I was in Rochester. It's a little bit different this year because we do have the reduced number of C1s. We're a super small publication. I think people usually think we're bigger. I'm the only real like full-time employee, and then there's my boss Andrew Yee, who's the owner. So it's just like the two of us. And so getting to race weekends is definitely costs some money. I mean, between travel and Scott Page, the organizer at Rochester, was great. He hosted me. I ate like all their cereal in their house. By the end of the weekend, I was just like, so I ate all your cereal, which I kind of felt bad about because I'm from the Midwest. It's this thing in the Midwest where no one ever takes the last cookie, right? Like if they bring cookies in at work, it just kind of sits there and sits there and sits there. So I had a little bit of that going on. But yeah, so I was at Rochester covering that. And then the World Cups we've done on site pretty much every year since they've been happening, or every race since they've been happening in the US. So I just got back from Iowa City today, where we were all weekend. And then this one's pretty easy for me coming up this weekend. I don't know when this will publish, but it's in Waterloo, Wisconsin, which is 30 minutes from my house. So I get to sleep in my own bed this week. So that's nice.
Nice.
You get to eat
And
up
you
your own
didn't go to
cereal.
Roanoke the first sort of weekend of the year.
I did not. So yeah, I think we'll be kind of shooting for covering the C1s. I said like the reduced number this year makes it a little bit more feasible for us. So in theory, most likely in person we'll be at Cincy, Pan Am's for sure. Pan Am's was incredible last year, and then we do the marathon that is U.S. Nationals in December.
Cool. So yeah, we'll talk about the C1s. I guess I was kind of early here, but I know there's been a lot of talk about that. What's your take on that reduced number and the way that's going to affect domestic racing this year?
Yeah. Bill Scheiken from CX Hairs, I think that's been kind of his thing. So I might be quoting some of him on this.
I've listened to a lot that he said about it. I think he said a lot of really interesting things, and I know you know Bill well, so I was kind of curious, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I think 7 was probably too many. I mean, I think there is some validity to the concerns the Euros have. I don't think it's as much a problem on the women's side as we saw at the Jingle Cross World Cup on Saturday. The North American women and our adopted North American did quite well, and in fact beat the Euros. So I think it's not as big of a concern. But I know on the men's side, you might see the top ranked American might have a first row start and kind of fall back kind of quickly. But at the same time, in my opinion, the way the rule was made, it was a rule that was on the books that basically, for folks that don't know, it said that you needed to have 10 international riders from 5 different countries at your race to be a UCIC 1. And they didn't enforce it. And then basically they said, last year in about October, they're like, all right, we're enforcing this next year, and gave no one really the chance to recruit riders, to address the issue, to see what we could do about getting, international riders to the C1s. And so they made the change like that on a dime. They said they were going to do it. And we've seen with the UCI, they'll totally like slow walk other things. Like, for example, equal pay. We can enforce this rule right away, but it's going to take another 2 or 3 years before we can mandate that the women race 50 minutes. So I don't know. You just kind of see it's a priority that they made, that they chose to enforce, but it certainly has affected the racing. I mean, you guys were in Rochester, or at least
Mhm.
Tony, I know I saw you.
Yep.
Todd, you were there too. We just talked
Yeah.
about that.
Yep.
But you were running around, helping with the course and stuff. I mean, everyone was like, I'm gonna say the vast majority of the top North American riders were there, along with a number of European riders. And so I think it's created these focal points to get the best riders in the same place. And I think y- the upshot of that is there was a lot of energy. There was a lot of energy among the riders, among us who cover it. Going into Rochester is like, all right, we're stoked. Let's do this. But the corollary of that is we don't. We'll have World Cup Waterloo, which has a World Cup, and then after that we have one, two, three, four weekends maybe with all C2s. And so, how is that going to affect the energy in the scene and stuff? And I think there's going to be this big drop off. And then we get Cincy. The Canadians the next week have their national championships, and then we have Pan Ams, and Pan Ams is a huge deal. So I think we'll get that energy around that block. But then we go back to C2s again, and a number of riders will go to Europe over the Thanksgiving period and stuff. So I think it's going to create focused periods of interest and intensity. But at the same time, I think it's going to create a really challenging atmosphere to kind of keep that excitement for the domestic racing scene going in October and parts of November. And so that is certainly a big, big question mark to come. What's going to happen come, a week and a half from now?
Right. Yeah, I thought Rochester. I mean, Rochester always gets a pretty good draw, but I thought this was especially good this year, and that there was a real energy there, because it was the first one of the season and the C1, and there were so few. It seemed like that maybe that contributed to just getting a few riders there who hadn't been there before. But one of the things that Bill and Powers talked about on one episode was riders losing riders to Europe, particularly the male riders. Do you think that that's going to happen with some of our younger riders? That we're going to have more riders that race a less focused domestic schedule because of this?
Uh, I mean, it seems like that's kind of the direction that we're going. I mean, you talk to any of them, and they certainly have those aspirations. I don't know. I mean, I think we had the series for 1 year, and we thought the series was going to save us, and it didn't. We saw the amount of money it takes, but that at least created some excitement for the domestic racing scene, and you actually even saw some athletes who normally don't race cross who chose to do cross because of the series. I don't know. I mean, I think, look around, there aren't as many races. Attendance at Jingle Cross was certainly down for both the races in terms of amateur participation this year. It was noticeable. They're trying to create opportunities for their sponsors. And so, Katie Compton on the women's side showed when she was racing the Dave Veve series that she was getting so much more attention for her sponsors and for herself by being on those free live streams from Czech, right? And so Katie Keogh is doing that this year. Uh, and I think, Powers talked about too. It was like in their generation, there was a series, there was the USGP, they raced here domestically, but now you're looking at a situation where riders are looking at Europe and they're saying, all right, well, to truly be successful, you have to go to Europe and acquit yourself well. So we'll see. I look at riders, like Curtis White, who I know you've had on your show. He's with Cannondale, and I did a story on their team and talked to Stu Thorne, the team manager, and he's like, "Look, we've looked at Europe, and a year later they're doing it with Katie Keogh, and so I definitely see him and Hyde as two riders who may do it, and if they can prove to be successful and handle it, we may see more riders do it." Which would be a shame. I mean, it's fun to have good domestic racing here.
Sure.
But it may be with fewer C1s, it could create a situation where it creates shorter blocks of time where those riders need to be in the US if they also have European aspirations, right? You can be
Right.
here for the C1s, for Pan Ams, for the beginning of the season, and then you can kind of like go to Europe for the World Cups and, perhaps try to get start money at one of the other series that are out there. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, which is, I think, kind of Bill's position as well.
Yeah, he's done a yeah. I don't want to belabor it because he's done a great job with it, and people should check out what he has to say about it because he knows a lot more about it than I do. But I think it's a really interesting topic, and it's great to hear kind of your take on it too. With that in mind, though, let's talk about you. So one of
Ooh.
the things I'm interested in is just sort of how you got where you are in terms of covering cycling and what that looks like as a journalist, specifically covering cycling as opposed to, I don't know what other, journalistic backgrounds you have or interests maybe in terms of other sports or just covering other types of news in general. But how did you get into covering cycling specifically?
Sure. Well, I warned you before that I'm used to asking the questions. So
Yeah,
when it comes,
yeah, I
right,
like
when
this
it comes to
this this
talking about
dynamic.
Oh man, I have to talk about myself. Man, I don't know. Like, I mean, if you're looking at, I'll just start with my education, right? Everyone thinks it stems from education. My bachelor's is in civil and environmental engineering. I have a master's in water resources engineering, and I have a PhD in environmental studies.
No kidding.
So I've done nothing related to journalism, but I've always been into writing. I used to read the sports page religiously growing up, and as I moved kind of into high school, I mean, we're talking like third grade, and as I moved into high school, that expanded into reading the entire newspaper. And so I've always written, whether it be, for the school newspaper or it be for my friends and I had a fantasy baseball league, and I would write like newsletters every week for it. What else have I written for? I've had an opinion column in the college newspaper. And then, so I've just always written, always come up with stories. I think that's a big part of it is, right? Like I wrote a thing about fantasy baseball and I would just make up these stories. And we had like, right, heroes and goats in our little stupid league. I had a podcast at one point for that. So it's always been a thing I did. And so I started cycling in 2012. I started racing cross in 2013. It was my first love, and I just absolutely loved it. I raced up through 2015, and then literally during pre-ride of the first race in 2016, I threw out my back. Really bad. I had like horrible spasms. I couldn't walk. Basically, it was just like had to shut down the rest of the season. And, I'd always kind of read Cyclocross Magazine and, seen some of the local race reports. And I'm not going to lie, like I've been trying to work on this, being like super Midwest modest, but I kind of knew I could do a better job than other people. And so I wrote a race report for that first race, and then everyone enjoyed it. They thought it was really cool. And so then I just kept doing them, and they turned into these ridiculous race reports with interviews and stuff, and everyone was super enjoying it. And, kind of caught the attention of my current boss because I would send them to Cyclocross Magazine. He's like, hey, do you want to write about Euro races? And then I finished my PhD in the spring of 2017. Yes, spring of 2017. It was a miserable experience for me. The end of it, especially the last couple years, were very trying. And so I was just like, I don't want to do anything related to like what I actually went to school for checks notes, 9 years. So then, he hired me to work full time. And so I've been doing it since then. So that's kind of how I got here. I mean, I think it's just a function of I love writing. I love telling stories, and I love people's stories. And so, yeah, it's cool to get to kind of like tell those on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you find that with the new sort of the way media is changing with doing things like this, where we're doing, podcasts and everything's kind of photo heavy, are you doing less writing at this point, or do you still feel like you're able to do enough of that writing and that people are still interested in reading and not just listening to things or looking at photos?
Oh, that's a good point. It's something that is interesting. I think that, I think what Cyclocross Magazine has built over the years is kind of like a commitment to I think we overdo things sometimes. When you do read a lot of articles, for example, there's certain sites I just can't. It's not in cycling. I'm not saying this is in cycling, but in other sports, where it's like there'll be like an interesting premise, and then you'll get inside the article, and actually it was just an interesting premise, with a couple paragraphs, and I'm like, well, I feel dumber for having read this.
Right.
And so I don't think we want to be that. And so, we stick to we publish daily. But, if you read our bike reviews, if you read our bike profiles, those are super in depth. I just did I interviewed Scott Herman, race announcer. It was a 7,000 word transcript that I had to type up. And it seems like people enjoyed reading that. So, yeah, I mean, the podcast has its place for sure, but I think there are people that are interested in reading words and reading people's stories. And I write a lot, especially during gravel season, because there's less going on. And I don't think, probably in part because of the title of our publication, people have caught on that we kind of crushed it. To use a we ground it. We ground it with our gravel coverage the last couple years.
You have.
But
You have.
yeah, well, thank you. But now during cyclocross season, it's just like this fire hose of, we try to be kind of like a community-based thing. Obviously, we're a business, but at the same time, it provides a way for, teams and athletes and folks to kind of like get the message out to other people in the cross community. And so we say yes to like almost anything that people send us. So right now I've been spending a lot of time doing editing, trying to coordinate, make sure that I don't forget about anyone. And stuff like that. But yeah, no, I mean, I was doing so much like long form writing during gravel season. I love it in a way, but at the same time, oh, could it just be cross season where people send me stuff? And then it gets to cross season and I just get like a ton of stuff. And I was like, can we go back to gravel season already where I get to write every day? So
Well, I can tell you, as a promoter, I appreciate that you write. That when I send you stuff, you write it. Like you do your own work on it. Because I have a writing background and I write press releases and send them out, and I think I write pretty decent press releases. So a lot of times they get published as is, which is nice because then I have some control. And I wrote for some newspapers and kind of have a little bit of background in terms of like what that format looks like. But I like it way better when I send it and someone takes the time to like come back and ask a question and then write their own story. Because I mean, they actually cared about what I was doing and they didn't just sort of regurgitate my press release. You know what I mean? And I noticed that you do that. You're one of the few people that do that. So I always appreciate that when I send you something that it gets its own spin and that you're putting your own voice into it and you're just using the information and not my stuff specifically.
Yeah, no, those are great. I mean, you get quotes, you get photos, like you totally have it dialed. I mean, I will say that in this landscape, we've been doing gravel coverage, but some people say, "Oh, why aren't you covering this, covering that?" And I think the reality is like, as a promoter, you have to create your own content. And I think there are a lot of publications that you can send them stuff and they might just publish it. Don't make typos because they literally might not look at it.
Right. And I'm not even talking about cycling publications. I'm just talking about like the local newspaper or, you know what I mean? Like some of those kind of things too. Maybe cycling too, but just print papers that are just local that we're trying to get local coverage and they just kind of, slap the press release in there.
Yeah. Well, they might be dealing with different like timelines and stuff, but like, I don't know. I mean, I want to help you put your best face forward. I think I'm a good writer, and if I can add context or polish things up or stuff like that, that's like a service I enjoy providing. I enjoy the challenge of it, But I guess to the point, though, we hear this, right? Like, why in the cycling world? Why aren't you covering X or why aren't you covering XYZ? And it's just like you got to make your own content, a press release, a couple of quotes, and 2 or 3 good images, and people will publish it, and so you can create your own content that way. And I think the last couple of years, I feel like we've built a good partnership, getting the word out about the Dirty Bike series because we've been in touch. You give me good assets, you give me a press release, and we can do it. Results are easy to find. So I think it's been to your benefit, right? Like,
it's been great to get the coverage. The local riders get to get their name in there when they never would otherwise, and yeah, it's been awesome to be in there for sure.
Yeah, no, you guys, great job.
I was gonna say, I think there's also some element, and you talk about creating your own content. I think it's kind of a really maybe a really salient point to your maybe understating even here is that when people put on events is to make them content worthy, right? And if somebody's just putting on a race, it's kind of hard to dig out much content. But if you can kind of build some stories into it, and like you're saying, like some of these, the C1s, there's a lot of energy because why? Well, because you had a lot of top riders, and so it's trying to that's kind of like that's content already there, but it takes work to get there. I mean, Scott didn't just put the race together and then hope somebody was coming. I mean, you got to contact people, you got to see what's going on, you got to promote the event, you got to get to be a C1, which is a huge level of work. But I think take something like Tony's Dirty Bike series, and you're like, why is it got good content? But if you're creating some drama about some of the riders, and you got like, Dan Timmerman's coming and Jay Powell's coming, and you start creating some of this kind of content already, I think it makes Zach's job a little bit easier, but it's easier and it's also sellable content. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, you guys have done a great job getting some of the East Coasters to come. But especially if you're looking at trying to kind of reach more of a national audience, to have your thing become more than just like a local race report, right? That we publish, which are great because that's how I started, and they're great. But let's be honest, it was really only of interest to people from Wisconsin. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yes, to get to where you're getting the attention of a more, a regional or even national audience, I thought that was one reason why your series caught my attention. Was it's like we have Tweakin and we have Curtis White throwing down at your series, which was like super interesting. And there's other races that have had top, that brought in top level women. There was a race out in California that had Katarina Nash and Amity Rockwell racing the week after they won Lost and Found and DK. It's like, that's super interesting, and that gives it that national attention level, like you said. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things you can do, and that's something Bill and I have talked a lot about is cycling. We look around, obviously gravel's growing, cross is definitely plateauing, and it's a question I've heard a lot about, what's the state of cross? And it's like, well, at a certain point, we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over and be like, well, I hope people show up. You need to be creative, in terms of what you do. And, one thing, like, for example, that's coming up at Trek, they're doing the Legends race, right? Like they have this stupid fundraise. It's relatively cheap. It's like $15. You dress up in a costume, but they like this weekend, they have like Sven Ness racing. They have J Pow's racing. Last year, Emily Batty raced. They're just getting like all these people, and it's like, that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
I signed
absolutely.
up. I'm doing it.
Nice.
It's like, Tim Johnson does it. Matt
Right.
Kelly came out for it last year, the only U.S. World champion. Is he? Is he the only? Yeah, because Compton only ever finished second, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Only.
Matt Kelly. Yeah. So
Only.
Matt Kelly, our only one still.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's just cool that all the stuff that they're doing and thinking outside the box and saying, well, I mean, you guys had a moto supporting your gravel race.
Yeah, we got a little controversy on ITCX Mag about that too, so that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, no moto support in gravel racing apparently, except art.
Yeah, I know.
It's all right. That was fun. I enjoyed the conversation going back and forth on that.
Yeah.
So what is
good sports?
What's that?
So you guys were good sports about it. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, we'll take it. So what have you learned over covering gravel the last year or two here that you've kind of dipped in more into that end during cross season? What have you seen about that scene?
I think that what has been most striking to me about gravel is how interested people are in the stories of like your average rider. I think there's this sense of like, I don't know, we cover a lot of like elite racers. That's kind of what we do. But I'm really struck about how people are really grasp and are interested and want to hear the stories of everyone and their struggles and what goes on. And I think that's like super instructive for the cycling, for how we cover cycling and kind of the media. Is that, people want to hear like, oh, you finished, like we had a diarist who did DK and he ended up riding with Taylor Phinney because Taylor Phinney had just like a disastrous day at DK. He's like, I out sprinted Taylor Phinney at the finish and it was great. People want to read those stories. We did a story about a couple who rode a tandem, for DK, and we did a profile their bike, and I kind of added some background to it, and like people were super interested in their story. So yeah, I think it's just the stories and that people don't necessarily care about the front of the race. It's really about, that grassroots vibe. Is everyone having a good time? And, kind of the idea that everyone's story is interesting, worthy, and one that should be told. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned from covering gravel.
How many big gravel events did you attend this summer?
I only went to DK. So for gravel covering, I've been to DK twice, and then I went to Gravel Worlds last year. The way that I've typically covered them is kind of to do, I like to do kind of like an interview with the promoter to try to get a sense of what's unique about their event and stuff, and maybe learn some background and kind of tell the story of it that way. And then, kind of give results to give some love to whatever local heroes or professional interlopers are at those events. But yeah, so in terms of covering on site, I've only really done those two. Those are a trip. Those are an undertaking in and of themselves for sure.
Yeah, DK must be insane just to see the distance and the amount of people that are there.
It's incredible. We have a podcast about it. We have a podcast called Grodio.
I've heard it, yeah.
Which you can find on the Wide Angle Podium Network. But yeah, it was if you haven't been, you gotta go. The energy is just incredible. The vibe. I mean, and it's hard. Like, I don't want to do it. Like, people were I was talking to someone, they were like, you should do it. And I was like, longest ride, I did a ride of 125 miles and I wanted to die. But no, just the energy and like the positivity. I think that's another thing about gravel is that it is so positive because whether you're, racing at the front or just, as Ted King calls it, the mullet protocol, it's just so positive. Everyone's just excited. Like, you're accomplishing something. You're doing gravel, like you're doing Twizzler, tequila, beer rest stops or whatever, bacon rest stops. You're telling your story. You're having a good time. It's like everything that like cycling should be. Like, there's this sense of community, and that's, occurs at DK. It's just that there's like 3,000 people there. So it's a cool scene. The energy in Emporia is amazing. They do a party all night. There's people, it's a street fest, and people are finishing at 1, 2 in the morning. And there's still people out there just ringing cowbells and drinking beer or whatever, having fun, grilling out and cheering every person who comes in. It's really cool. It's like, can we do more of this, please, in cycling?
That's cool. Any events that you've that you like are on your bucket list to go cover in the gravel scene? Like, any ones that you think are they look pretty cool and you want to see it in person?
Oh man. Well, I kind of want to do some of them, to be honest. I wish to do one, I wish that I could get acclimated to elevation and do Crusher in the Tusher. That race just looks incredibly amazing, but also I've ridden at altitude and it destroyed me. So I don't know if I'll be doing that one. Land Run is definitely like a bucket list to do. With the weather conditions, I don't know if I want to do that one. I don't think like my rental car company is going to be too pleased about that one, especially if I get my rental car like stuck in that red clay.
Right.
That would be kind of ugly. But there's lots of races that are coming up. Another one, the Oregon Trail Gravel Grinder, first year. It was a 5-day stage race this year. I was just like, I want to go here. And then, I mean, like the coup de grace, the creme de la creme was the Rift in Iceland. And we got some images from the event. I was just like, oh my God. I want to do this so bad. It's just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So yeah, that's what's been cool. It's been awesome to see, there's these events that are like really a big deal, right? Like Landra and DK or whatever, but then there's races everywhere. Like I just one that sticks out is the Great Gator Gravel Grinder down by Miami. Like, who knew they did gravel down by Miami?
Right.
But they just super fun vibe. It looks like it was super fun. Like, they just sent me a t-shirt to say thanks for covering it. And it's an awesome t-shirt. And I was like, that's really cool.
Nice.
So for me, the coolest thing has been to just get to see all these grassroots events and the different like spin that everyone puts on them. And kind of get to see what's the flavor, what's the motivation. And it's been fun. There's so many cool events.
Yeah, it's been just a crazy explosion.
Where do you see yourself fitting? I mean, like, I was secretly checking out your cross race results and stuff online, and seeing it, obviously as you've gotten busier with the publication, that your racing has dwindled or vaporized, or however you want to look at it. Right?
That's due to back issues. That's actually an injury. It's not related to the job. To be perfectly honest with you, that's like really bad back problems.
Oh, that's even worse. I was hoping it was just work related, and I was thinking, geez, because you really like to do these stories, and I think it adds this element when and hopefully you can get these things behind you, is that you're able to kind of be a participant in the story as well. Adding that layer. I know I like to read things that when people like that they did some of these things, or they wrote a section of it, or whatever it is, right? You kind of get
Yeah.
that firsthand account of like, yeah, these guys were going 50K an hour. I was killing myself doing 20K an hour, whatever it is, right? And you're like, wow, and it just adds to that kind of that element. And I was kind of hearing you say that, I was like, geez, I'm like looking, I'm like, man, he hasn't been racing much. I hope he hasn't been getting so busy that he hasn't been able to race his bike at all. But I guess that would be a good thing at this point, though, since you've been warding off an injury. Is it something that's improving, or what's your outlook on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've done gravel. I did several gravel events last year, and this year I had like this really big spring planned. I ride a shit ton, which in Wisconsin usually means sitting on the trainer in my basement on Zwift. And it's just the dismounting and remounting that are super hard for me.
Mhm.
But I just had a myriad of health issues. Like this year was a disaster for me in terms of more health issues. So I didn't get to race. But I finally got healthy at the beginning of August. I rode a shit ton in August, and I signed up. I'm racing at Trek on Saturday. It's like my
Nice.
first legit cross race where I tried one in 2017 and I finished DFL. I almost got lapped by second to last place. So that race just did not go well. But I've been feeling good going to practices. So hopefully I'll be back and have a little bit more insight for cross in terms of race reporting. Now that I'm doing it, I remember what it's like to have your heart rate at 180 beats per minute for an hour. So yeah, I'm super stoked about it.
Do you, with the back injury, do you find that gravel is better on that? Because I know a couple of guys, some local guys who've had a bunch of injuries, and as much as gravel seems like it's kind of a lot of pounding on your body, and you're kind of taking a lot. It's a couple of guys who've had some injuries do really well there. Like they're finding that it's not beating them up in the same way that road racing or cross racing is.
I feel like for whatever reason that it works out the position you're on a bike, it doesn't really hurt your back as much. Can I run? No. Could I swim? Probably would hurt my back. But for whatever reason, I can sit on my bike and I can put out power via my legs. So yes, it's been great. I mean, and
Yeah.
I do a lot of long road riding. I love doing long road rides as well. And so, there's lots of stretching every hour, usually eat right? Do your eating every hour or half hour. Usually involves a little bit of stretching. But it definitely, I did some races last year where it becomes challenging, where you're stretching on the bike because you're like, you don't want to stop. Like you're kind of near the front.
Right.
And so that could become a little challenging. But yeah, no, it's been good. I love gravel. It's super awesome discipline. And I guess in my specific case, I'm able to do it. So I'm hoping to bounce back next year. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like I said, you're definitely not alone there. I've heard that. We had a friend of mine who just did DK this year, and he'd had back injuries and all kinds of just was sort of beaten up, and he finished that and was just
Oh,
super
great.
stoked on gravel for it. And he says it's
Awesome.
just the position's a little different, and as much as he was crushed when he got done with DK, his sister took this little video clip of him, and he's a tough dude, and she sends that, and he just looks like a ghost. Just like he's so crushed and he's so tough. And I know him so well that when I see how crushed he is in that video, I'm like, I never want to do that. Like, I do not want to ride for that distance when it beat that dude up that bad. But he did it, and he's talking about going back. So
Well, I'll say this. I mean, when you suffer from injuries, there's pain due to the injury. And this is something that, Courtney McFadden, I always tell her, is like kind of an inspiration for me because she's had 2 hip surgeries. And so she's dealt with just excruciating pain and fighting through it and finally having surgery. And we were talking, she was like, look, I'm glad that I'm physically destroyed now after races and not in pain because of my injury. And I think there's a huge difference, right? And it sounds like your friend
yeah,
was in the physically crushed
right, right,
status.
right,
And that's so much better of a feeling than being in the situation where you can't finish because your back seizes up. You
right.
want to be physically drained, via everything that you've put into it. So I would love that experience. I will take it.
Cool. So, so what's got you from a journalistic perspective? What's got you excited about this cross season? Like, is there something that particular, sometimes journalists, you go into so much more depth and you see so many more different things. And also, you kind of nerd out on things probably that maybe your everyday fan doesn't, or even the riders don't, just because you got this really sort of special angle on it. Is there something kind of special going on this year that kind of makes you tick a little bit more, or something that you're more interested in that maybe not everybody else is?
It's funny you bring that up. Jeremy Powers, I saw him at Jingle Cross and he was there doing stuff for GCN. And I saw him and he was just sitting there and he was cheering every rider. He's like, go, go Ellen, go Courtney, go Rebecca. And I was like, dude, you're a journalist now. You're not allowed to cheer for these people. And so it's an interesting spot that we're in, right? Like we're doing journalism, but at the same time, like our goal is more to promote the sport per se than like, opinionate, dig up dirt and stuff like that. So it's a weird spot, but we do some journalism. And so it's, this weird place, and I'm a people person too. And so like, I get totally jazzed about just seeing everyone. So it's something I struggle with, but that being said, I'm not allowed to cheer for people. But secretly I am. And I always tell people that, like, I have like the kind of like the silent fist bump with team directors and team mechanics and stuff when their riders do well. I know I'm a terrible journalist that I just admitted that. Sure.
I think you can get away with it though. You're
Okay.
not covering Congress. You know what I mean? Like
Fair.
you're covering
Yeah.
cycling. It's fun, right? You want everybody to do well. You want you want the sport to succeed. So you can kind of have that's, I think in general, you get that with sports journalism, maybe a little bit more so with a smaller sport than say if you were covering the NFL or something where it's a little, you might have a little more cutthroat journalism going on there, but you still have the homers in those sports too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Sure. So storylines for this year, I mean, I think that the one is unavoidable is, Megali Rochette has been the toast of the town of the cross scene so far this year. And it's been fun. I posted on Twitter, like one of the first interviews I did at this position was with her, because I had watched her and Katarina Nash in 2017 kind of like race mountain bikes against each other. And she just seemed like a really fun, interesting person. And that's proven true. So it's been, fun to watch her career. I know last year she crushed it early. She had a good November, but, she really wanted good results in Europe and did not get them. It was a tough experience for her. So to see her kind of achieve that goal of winning the World Cup, knowing how important to her it was was really cool. And so I think that it's pretty clear that she has a huge upside. Claire Hansinger is another rider I really like. I met her in 2017 at Jingle Cross. She finished second under the lights. I remember she was finished right behind Sunny Gilbert. And I had just met her, and it was just like, you meet these people and you're kind of like, oh, they're pretty cool. And you start keeping your eye on them. And you're like, all right, yeah, now she's second at Pan Am's, finished second at Nats. Last year came in as the favorite in the U23 race, and she won. So, to see young riders like that develop. Rebecca Feringer is another one that she's just been slowly making her way up. I know I'm going to end up forgetting people now, and someone's probably going to get upset that I don't mention them. But just all these stories of kind of following, what's going on, how people are succeeding. I've dealt, as an athlete, I've dealt with a lot of adversity in my life. So anyone facing adversity, I think I am a big fan of, to see how they deal with that and deal with those challenges. So anyone like coming back from an injury and stuff. And then Katie Compton, you can't not like just look at what she's accomplished and just be like, holy shit, like just holy shit.
Right.
Like
Yeah,
how does she do this? Like last year, she just had the worst year of her life with allergies and stuff. And she comes to Nats and everyone's like, I don't know. This might be the year. And she just destroys the field. And it's just like, I don't know. You just watch that and you're just like, how do you do this?
Yeah,
like, how
we
do
were
you do
lucky
this?
enough to get to talk with her through Skype a couple of days before Nats, and that was pretty cool. That was one of my favorite interviews to be able to do, just because she's unbelievable.
Yeah.
For somebody to be that dominant, it's amazing.
Well, and I don't think, if you talk to her right before Nats, I don't know that she thought she was going to win. I'm sure she probably had more of those thoughts creeping into her mind. at that time. So yeah, I mean, if you need more storylines, get at me. I'll give you plenty. I'll give you riders to follow. I don't know. I think there's just a lot of cool ones. One that is pretty cool to see is Caroline Mani appears to be back. You know, she finished as high as second at Worlds, was consistently winning on the domestic scene, and she's just had like a ton of personal physical type issues that she's dealt with. I saw her after last Sunday's race, which I guess was yesterday. She finished fourth. I was like, they call her Frenchie. Her nickname is Frenchie on her team. It's like, Frenchie, way to go. She's like, oh, I had a panic attack at this race last year. Like, it's so great, you know, that, and I'm like, I know, it's awesome. You look great. You're making all of your faces and stuff. You're back. So it's been cool to see her overcome the adversity that she's faced. So yeah, lots of really cool stories and athletes, like you said. I think you get to know them. You know, and I do try to pay attention to the interviews I do. I mean, you guys are probably experiencing this, right? Like sometimes you're so worried thinking about the next question. Like I could just be saying whatever right now, and you might not be listening because you're like, oh shit, what is the next question I need to ask?
Right. How do you keep this rolling, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, so you know, then on the men's side, it's I mean, I'll say this. I think on both sides last year at Nationals, it was like, well, who am I cheering for?
Right.
I don't know, because they're all freaking awesome. Right? You could write the story for any one of the top athletes who could have won, you know, on either side, you know, what that story would have been. So yeah, I mean, your boy, the pride of Dwaynesburg, New York, Curtis White, you know, I think he's made huge strides, especially last year, adding, you know, much improved technical ability to his riding. And he's just so talented and so powerful. And I think that to see what he can do. And, you know, Hyde, he's the champ, man, 3 times in a row. Super, super interesting. Have you interviewed him yet?
Yes, we talked to him at Rochester last year after the race.
Guys are, is he an interesting dude?
Yeah, we didn't get to talk to him for too long, but yeah, he definitely is an interesting dude.
I'll have him back on then for like, you know, a good hour or whatever. Like he's just really insightful and a really good understanding, you know, but he's been dealing with adversity. So it's like, again, it's something that I empathize with. Carrie, if you haven't seen his vlogs, they're fucking hilarious.
Carrie is super funny. Carrie and Rebecca both. They have like this little comedy duo. They need like their own space, I think, to just sort of to riff for a while.
Yeah.
I think both of them are hilarious.
Well, swing by their tent anytime in a race, or just, you know, watch their vlog. Like, you know, they have a really good thing going on. And then we have Gage. You know, I think Gage is talking about riders who can be successful in Europe. I think that he has the skill set, the mentality. He had a great race on Sunday. He was, you know, close to banging with the Euros well into the race on Sunday at Jingle Cross. So yeah, like there's lots of cool stories. There's riders coming up. I went to Montana Cross Camp, the junior development camp with the women this year, and I got to meet, you know, these young aspiring riders, and I saw so many of them at Rochester and Jingle Cross, and just to see their excitement and enthusiasm is like, you know, that's why you do this, right? Like there's definitely some not very glamorous parts of this job, but to get the chance to like learn these stories and get the chance to share them with people is really awesome. And what is probably what brings me back for every day that I'm doing some like tedious task of like posting results or whatever, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, and listening to your and talking about the overcoming adversity part of it, then it is interesting when you start to realize how many, you know, and just top athletes are overcoming something. I think it's a lot of times we take it for granted, right? You're watching pros and they're racing, they're going hard, and everybody always thinks, boy, you know, they got it made, they got everything's in their favor. And then you find out like they got like some major stuff going on, and they got some pretty hard things to overcome, and they overcome them, and they still produce these great races. And I think it's just, you know, you're overcoming your own, but you have all these stories that you can look at and say, I can overcome this because these guys are overcoming it, right? And you can draw off of that.
Oh, I think so. I mean, I tell, you know, I think people say you write what you know. And so I would say that in terms of my writing and the stories that I identify with are definitely anyone who's overcoming an injury, like I'm going to tell that story. So I will admit that I have that bias. But yeah, no, I draw on them all the time, and I tell athletes, there's a gravel racer named Lauren De Crescenzo who literally almost died in a road race in 2016. Like she had a traumatic brain injury. They didn't think she'd ever ride her bike again. They didn't think she'd ever walk again. And she's come back and had this comeback racing gravel. And so I've been dealing with my own health issues this year, and I was just like, well, shit, I can only ride the trainer for an hour today and I'm dead. And then I would text her and be like, hey, just so you know, I read your story again and I wasn't feeling so bad about my life. Because you almost died, And so, yeah, I think you read those, but you also see how they've overcome them. And I guess at least for someone like me, I definitely, at the same time, it's like I try to glean stuff about how they race, how they train. I'm always trying to learn little tidbits from the interviews that I can apply to my own life or share with others or whatever. Yeah. So that's the thing. If you do a lot of it, you talk to a lot of people, you can learn a little bit too.
Yeah, well, you do a great job of it, and I think we lack it in cycling in the same when you compare it to more mainstream sports like football or NBA or whatever it is, where those organizations are really developing the storylines of the pros and the top athletes throughout the year, and as a fan, you can kind of engage in those things and get excited about it. And in cycling, sometimes it's hard to find those, particularly with the domestic racing, but your magazine and you're a spot where we can get those things. So it's really cool to be able to get into those storylines, particularly of those top racers and sort of what they're doing and building those competitions. So it's a cool thing to see.
Well, thank you. That's my goal, is to try to get and I do my best. I'm sure I drop the ball at times, but yeah, I mean, I do my best. I try to keep my eye out for good stories, and I'll just be talking with someone and I'll be like, you know what? We're going to do a story on this, which then creates a shit ton of work for me. Because those like good feature stories definitely take a long time.
Right.
But I've got one, Allison Ahrensman is one. I met her at Montana Cross Camp, and she was telling me her story about running her team and a women's junior Devo team and dealing with the stress. And I was like, you know what? I identify with this. Let's do a story. And so I need to work on it. And I saw her yesterday and I'm like, Allison, I'm going to do it. She's like, sure you are, Zach. So she's giving me shit, and I've done my best to try to be honest about it. But I like, that is certainly a challenge of being a small publication. I look at some bigger ones where, like say bicycling, they can do features and they can really dig in and do a story. I have to run a website. Like I have to get content up 7 days a week. I don't want to work weekends in a lot of cases, especially over the summer. So that means doing 7 days of content in 5 days, to kind of lean in on how things go. So it certainly creates its challenges of wanting to do those and blocking out time. But, at the same time, I think it's taught me good skills in terms of like planning and balancing out my time and, honestly, my new thing is taking a Friday and going to a local brewery and just banging out stories or transcripts. So don't tell anyone that's like my.
All right, we'll keep it. Yeah, we'll keep it a secret. We won't tell anybody. But yeah, it's got to be challenging when you're covering the day-to-day racing and you're trying, because that's got a more newsworthy element to it than say Bicycling Magazine or what we do when we're doing these little feature things where you can put it out whenever because it's more just about the people and the story that goes there. And it's great to be able to do those depth, but it doesn't have that newsiness and that we got to get it out and we got to get it out before it's out, before it's irrelevant, which I think is something that cycling lacks. And you do a good job of covering those differences, but it's got to be really hard to get those things out all the time.
Yes. I mean, I think one thing that I lament is I feel like there isn't necessarily, I mean, if we're honest, like a lot of super newsy stuff doesn't necessarily happen. I think this past summer, like Mathieu and Wout added a lot of news.
Yeah,
because they were just straight crushing,
right.
So there were a lot of situations like that where it's like, all right, we got to do this just this day. But, we kind of exist in this vacuum. We're it in terms of publications covering cyclocross. And especially, we talked about Bill Scheiken earlier from CX Hairs. He's definitely changed directions in terms of what he's doing. So when I started, even he would publish on his site, and like there was some motivation when stuff did happen to beat him. Like definitely there was a little bit of a competition between us. We've since become like really, really, really good friends, and collaborate together now. And he's kind of moved in different directions, and he's like, nah, whatever. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to focus on my stuff. So there's not as much pressure. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like stuff maybe 2 years ago that would have been like, I need to publish this today. I'm like, I'll just do it tomorrow. So, yeah, but yes, there is stuff that happens. There's stuff that comes up and you're working on a story and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I have to get this up. I have 30 minutes to like figure out what the heck's going on with this, and get it up. So that does happen, but it's fun, right? It's better than like
Sure.
a boring day job,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
You know, like where nothing happens. It's like fun. It's exciting. Those are my favorite days. Like when we get to like a news story or we get to like break some news or whatever. It's like that's really you get really jazzed. You're like, all right, we got to do this, and you feel like a real journalist. So those days are super fun.
So
So where do you
what's
see?
next? Yeah, what's next for you? I mean, it's like you did touched a little bit on like you guys have you've gotten into the gravel thing. It's very natural crossover, and especially as cross is plateauing a bit, and it's certainly not on the trajectory steepness that it was. Where do you see yourselves going? Do you see yourselves kind of dedicating a publication to gravel, folding that in, name change, and what else? What do you see beyond gravel? What are you seeing out there? What's kind of on the horizon?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've thought about that. I'll say this. I think one of the big reasons Cyclocross Magazine has been successful and has been able to exist, I follow what's going on with publications, right? And you see publications closing left and right when they lose funding or whatever, they can't get their supporter base anymore. The people who do cross are really, really, really passionate about cross. And so that's a great thing to have. Like you have this market, like they're going to keep coming back. Like there are people who are going to do cyclocross. They are going to read the website, and come to us. And frankly, from the perspective of advertisers, there's a lot of advertisers. There's a lot of companies that usually have people who are passionate about cross who are working at them. And so for them to get the word out about their products, like, yeah, you could go to Velo News or Cycling Tips, but if you want to reach the folks who are passionate about cross, like they're reading Cyclocross Magazine. This long predates my time, right? That's a testament to what my boss has built. He's owned it for a decade now. So I think that'll always be there. The gravel thing like truly happened by accident. Like it's been a thing that Cyclocross Magazine has covered, and I'll just be really honest. Like I started, and my boss was like last year, he's like, "Look, man, I'm gonna do a better job covering gravel," and I was just like, "Oh shit!" Like I've done some gravel. Like I like what am I gonna write about? Like what am I gonna do? And so I just kind of came up with like I just started like covering events and be like, hey, can I run results on your event? And then I started talking to people, and it's just kind of like grown into this monster. So it's been fun to get to do that. But yeah, I think it's a perfect balance. To me, it's just like it's perfect, right? Like Worlds ends, gravel's starting. You guys are kicking off your series. Like there's Serum in Iowa that was like an ice skating rink this year. It's just the perfect transition. And I think to me, the big events in gravel kind of end in September, with, Rebecca's Private Idaho is kind of like the big last national one. And guess what? That's when cross starts. So I think it's perfect. But as a name change, I don't know. The only way we get killed is like we definitely get killed on search engines on Google. Like if you just put in gravel cycling, you'll see other publications that have gravel cycling of some form in the title. So that's one thing that is a project in work in progress is improving our SEO, our search engine optimization for gravel cycling. Because Cyclocross Magazine isn't the first thing you think of, right?
Well, it will be because you're the only one covering it. So people figured it out pretty quick.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. It was not my intent to like be like super like I don't know to be covering gravel and I don't know. People are always like, oh, like you guys. It's like, oh, it's a national crossover. It's like you do know that you can go back and find coverage of the second ever Dirty Kanza on Cyclocross Magazine, cxmagazine.com. So it's been a thing that has been occurring. It's just that I don't know. I've done a pretty good fucking job of doing it.
There's no doubt about that. All right. Well, on that note, that's the perfect note to end on. So I appreciate you giving us your time. It was great to be able to chat with you. And we'll be watching Cyclocross Magazine all season long.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me on. It's cool to see your podcast and the guests that you guys have had, and it's cool to see, like I said, you create your own content. It's awesome that you guys are doing that work, putting it out there, and kind of letting people tell their stories. So, and this was really fun. I liked talking about myself. I don't know what
Awesome.
that means.
We'll do it again. So you can talk about yourself some more and tell us more about the season.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, guys. I
All right,
really,
thanks a
really
lot, Greg.
appreciate it. And have a great evening.
All right,
Great.
you too.
You too.